So, Dr. Kristin Andrews, well, first of all, welcome and thank you so much for coming to hear about ape minds. So, Dr. Kristin Andrews is a professor of philosophy at York University, and she's also the director of the cognitive science department, or program in the philosophy department. So, Dr. Kristin Andrews started out, she worked with children in Minnesota, as well as she works with children in applied contexts. And she's also worked with dolphins in Hawaii, so she has diverse experience with other species. But of course, we're the most interested in the orangutan side. So I think a lot of you are here because you're orangutan fans. You must be wondering, how does this fit in with philosophy? But it's interesting to philosophy because we want to know how they think. So you'll be hearing all about what theory of mind is and how orangutans' minds work. But I thought I'd tell you a little bit about why we love Kristin so much. so I was Anne Ressen's graduate student, and Anne used to always complain about the theory of mind data. She'd say, oh, it's so flawed. All these laboratory experiments have so many problems, and she'd list off all these problems. And then partway through, like a vision, Dr. Andrews came along, and she could criticize them all so well. So that's why we love her, is and she came up with why it's important, and also why things aren't as simple as a yes-no answer. So the question is a yes-no answer, do apes read minds? But you'll see she has a much more complex answer, which is always how it should be. So that was the big sigh of relief that she came in, and then came in not only just asking Anne, which was great, she'd say, how do apes think? But also she went and she watched them. She asked the apes. So she went to Indonesia twice and has spent time watching orangutans in their day-to-day activities, looking for these behaviors, so these social cognitive behaviors that she studies. So that was what we loved, is that she'd ask this question and listened and looked at it in those real contexts and then compared it to the research. So that's what you'll hear today, and that's why she's so great. So then my other little plug is I'll be selling these tickets for $2 each to win a copy of her book, but otherwise just buy one because they're only $40. So pretty good deal. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Laura, for that really sweet introduction. It was some of the best time of my life was spending time with Anne and Laura in Indonesia and with all of these orangutans from whom I've learned so much. So I'm really grateful for them, and they're acknowledged in the acknowledgments of the book, along with Laura and Anne and other members of the gang. But I did thank the orangutans as well, because I couldn't have done it without them. All right, so what I want to talk to you guys about tonight is this question I have up here: do apes read minds? And it might sound like a really weird question, so thanks for coming and bearing with me asking this question that seems really weird. There are maybe two things that are weird about it, just prima facie, just at first glance. One is, well, we're an orangutan organization. I'm talking about apes. You might think, oh, orangutans. Oh, the whole question is, do orangutans read minds? But we've got an orangutan arm up there, and we've got a human arm up there, too. We're apes as well. And chimpanzees are apes, and bonobos are apes, and gorillas are apes. And so this question is more about all of the different species, whether any of us read minds, and to the extent that we read minds. Now, the second weird thing about this question is reading minds. I mean, when you think about reading minds, hear about reading minds, you think about something like that, right? Oh, so telepathy. Are we talking about whether or not we have telepathic abilities, and whether orangutans have telepathic abilities? But that's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about something in a bit more banal and ordinary and everyday. And that question is whether we do things, or to the extent when we're mind reading, doing the sorts of things that we read about when we're reading Sherlock Holmes stories, right? So the sorts of things that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote about in, for example, the story A Scandal in Bohemia. Anyone read that story? Yeah, it's a good story, right? So it's this the story where Sherlock Holmes is hired by someone who turns out to be the hereditary king of Bohemia. And he's got a bit of a problem because he had some illicit relations with a woman he shouldn't have had illicit relations with. Irene Adler, Sherlock Holmes' nemesis. And Irene Adler had photographic evidence of this relationship, and what Sherlock Holmes had to do is get a hold of these photographs. Right? And so what Sherlock Holmes did in order to find these photographs that he knew Irene Adler had is he thought about what she knew and what she wanted. And she knew that these photographs were really valuable, really important. and that she wanted to preserve them. That was the most important thing to her, to preserve these photographs. And Sherlock Holmes also realized that Irene Adler knew where the photographs were. So what did he do? Well, of course, he tried to burn down her house. He burned down her house, and then he predicted, given what she believed, and what she knew, and what she wanted, that Irene Adler would go and rescue the photographs. And so he found the hiding place of the photographs and solved the problem. Right. So this is a typical example of what philosophers and psychologists are talking about, what they mean when they're talking about mind reading. They're talking about attributing knowledge states, beliefs, desires, and goals, and so on, to other people. So for example, in this picture, she's believing something. She's believing that he's nice, and he's mind reading, because he's thinking that she's thinking that he's nice. So mind reading appears to be rife in human courting behavior, among other places, and it might be rife in baboon and other primate courting behavior as well. So this is an image from Richard Byrne, one of his articles, and here you have baboons who are grooming, right? This male is grooming this female who's hiding so that the alpha male who's sitting on the other side of the rock can't see her, right? And the question is whether the baboon who's grooming the hidden female knows that the other baboon believes that he's not doing anything bad, right? Because if the alpha knew, the subordinate would be in trouble, get beaten up. So this question about mind reading, right, we can define it as the ability to attribute beliefs and desires, to predict and explain behavior. And psychologists started out looking at this question by assuming that's what we do, right? That we're like Sherlock Holmes, that we are able to predict what other people are going to do by thinking about what they want and thinking about what they think, what they believe, and what they know. And so when psychologists first started looking at this, they looked, in this very first study here, Premack and Woodruff, two psychologists in 1978, asked this question, do chimpanzees have a theory of mind? By which I mean, do chimpanzees mind read? And they asked this with the assumption that that's what we do every day. So do chimpanzees, they asked, do chimpanzees do what humans do, namely attribute states of mind to predict and explain behavior? And this started a lot of research in primatology, but also in child development. So 20 years or more of research has been committed to examining this question about which species mind read and when humans start to mind read. Now, we have all this research, 20-some years of research, all of this research money, all of this time spent, and there might be a problem with the starting assumption. The Sherlock Holmes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, is a great, brilliant writer, and he's often lauded as offering a fabulous example of how humans actually think, and Sherlock Holmes is described as and he describes Sherlock Holmes' reasoning as deductive, right? But it's often not deductive at all. It's often not deductive reasoning at all. And in some of the other Sherlock Holmes stories, we see a very different way in which we predict behavior. So mind reading might be overrated. So the starting assumption that Premack and Woodruff had that led to these 20 years of research, that we think about what others believe and desire all the time, might be overrated. So there's another story, Sherlock Holmes story, The Man with the Twisted Lip. Anyone read that one? It's also a really good one, right? So Sherlock Holmes has been hired by the wife of Neville St. Clair, who is a respectable gentleman who lives outside of London. Every day he goes into London to engage in his very important work. And he disappears. So Neville St. Clair's wife is like, where's my husband? So she hires, the smartest guy around, Sherlock Holmes, to help him so he can find Neville St. Clair. And so what does Sherlock Holmes do? He finds out where Neville St. Clair has last been seen. And where has he last been seen? He's last been seen in the upstairs window of an opium den with his cravat loose. It's shocking. He's half naked in an opium den. Now this is wrong because Neville St. Clair is a respectable gentleman. He is not the sort of man to frequent opium dens, especially half-naked. And so Sherlock Holmes realized there must be another explanation for why Neville St. Clair was in the opium den rather than smoking opium or whatever it might do. And it's not what you think either, seeing him half undressed. You know what he was doing? He was dressing up as a beggar to go out and panhandle because he had lost his job and didn't want to let his wife know about it. Right? So Sherlock Holmes solved this case not by thinking about beliefs and desires, but by thinking about character, by thinking about the kind of man Neville St. Clair is. And so we've got these two models of how we think about other people, how we predict what other people are doing. On the one hand, we have this mind-reading view, where we think about the beliefs and the desires. And in a sense, that's a very stripped-down way of thinking about other people, right? It's like looking at others as receptacles of beliefs and desires. And you don't know anything else about them. You know what they believe and you know what they desire. And this other view, we might call person reading. We know what kind of person this individual is. We know what his traits are, we know what his social relationships are, we know what his social roles are and what he ought to do given his role in society. And it's a very different model from this model that Premack and Woodruff started everyone thinking about in 1978. And so I'm suggesting here that we should back up a step. And instead of making this assumption that humans are constantly mind-reading, and then ask, and do other apes mind-read too, we need to first step back and ask the question, do humans